So yeah, like I said, in reality you won't be able to do this while the car is moving, because it would really fuck things up. You see, completely locked, and it's right now. It's only, remember, this only happens in manual mode. Okay, now if I, so right now that locking pawl, that not locking pawl, the fucking here's there, you can see it. Pushing the solenoid in causes the sun gear control plate to lock, which is this plate here. See, it's locked. It's no longer moving. Sorry, put the inner one. There you go. This here is just part of the housing. It's that one in there. This one right here where my pencil is right now. And the reason it's locking the whole transmission is it's connected to the sun gear, which is now connected to the pinion cage, which is connected to the shaft. Okay. If I put this in overdrive, you see, it's going to be unlocked. But the this is not going to happen in reality. Okay. It's only happening now because this is completely loose, out of play, because it's not attached to the housing. Once it's attached to the overdrive housing, then this is not going to happen. But you see there, now it's an overdrive, it turns freely, but the control plate still is not turning freely. Now what this basically does is, I'm just going to unlock it again. Should put a little more oil on. It's a little hard for it to come back. There. Now it's come back again. You see? See there how it's returned? There it is there on the pawl. I'm just gonna turn the transmission here. It's in manual. This is in the it's turning right now clockwise as it would if it was in the car, and it's turning the control plate with it. Okay. Now, depending on the speed, of the car, and the manual mentions this, talks about this on page, well, let me see what page. Okay, so it starts talking about the operating principles, which is what I'm doing now in video. It starts talking about this on page 4. Now in section A, section 10B, it talks about that thing, what that does. Now you'll see that the sun gear, it's actually helically cut. Now if it was a straight gear, then it wouldn't move, it would only move forward and backward. I mean, here it still moves forward and backward, but because it's helically cut, it has a tendency to, depending on the speed, to move back and forward. Where if it was, straight cut, if it was cut straight, then it wouldn't have this tendency, it would just stay in the middle regardless of the speed. So, just adjust it, there we go. Let's say we're in manual. Now the car starts to go the other way around. I won't be able to demonstrate it to you because this requires really high speeds. But it has a tendency to go back. Okay. That way it activates the overdrive. Okay. So depending on the speed, this will try to either go forward, or backwards. Okay, engaging or disengaging the overdrive. So let's say we're in neutral. And this here is turning really fast. It's probably going to try to go back like that, to go in overdrive. But if it's really heavy, you know, then it'll try to go back into a manual mode. Okay, and then you can just put your gears again. Now, I'm not really sure how to explain this part, but that's basically what it does, and I think it's just easier if you just read that section from the manual. But that's what it does, you know. It just allows... Now you see that there's this spring here? Now this spring, it's got a snap ring here, so that you can only... You see, if I push the spring, if I push this in, this shaft in, it's not welded to this little U-shaped piece here, this shift collar here. Well, the shift collar is actually the one inside, but this shift fork, it's not welded to this shaft. So if I push the shaft in, see, it won't go in because there's the snap ring here. But it will go out this. It will go out that way. So if I, you see, so what this does is, let's study how this. Overdrive. If this shaft is pushed in, there's nothing you can do to make this go back. But it can be done. Is if the car is turning really fast. Let's say it's in manual mode and it's turning really fast. But all of a sudden, you see, now it will be able to, against the force of the spring here, if the car is turning really fast, and you're in, here's how it works. Right now we're in manual mode, okay? The shift this shift fork is pushed that way towards the back. The sun gear is inside the pinion cage, and the pinions, these little gears that aren't turning. Now you see that there's a spring here. So if you start to turn, if the car starts to turn really fast, this tendency for it to turn really fast, I'm thinking that it will push against this spring force here, and if it is really fast, that strength is going to be large enough to push the sun ring back into the overdrive mode, and there you have overdrive. I'm not really certain of this. But I know, I mean, I can't demonstrate it by hand really, because the speed is not great enough to cause this to move. But you can see, hopefully, that as I'm turning this, the sun ring is turning. And this motion here, it tends to unscrew, to unbolt the helically cut sun ring. So it tends to push it backwards to overdrive. So basically that's what this does. With really high speeds, which I can't demonstrate here because I'm not able to turn it nearly as fast enough, it's going to push it back into overdrive, even if you have it in manual mode this way. But obviously if you push the shaft in like that with the if you have the shaft in, that's going to happen automatically. If you have the shaft out, then it'll only happen like that. I mean, sorry, if you have the shaft out that way, it will happen automatically, whereas if you don't, then it will happen like always. It'll be always on overdrive. That way it's always on overdrive. This is only on overdrive when it needs. So when the speed is large enough, it'll push against the spring here, and it'll push the sun gear back towards the locking plate. Okay. Now if the locking plate is locked, so in order to study the locking plate, since it only moves in manual mode, we have to study it in manual mode. It has no effect when it's in overdrive mode. It's in manual mode. It's turning the engine like that. It's possible for the shaft to turn this way because, unless you were in reverse. But when you push reverse, reverse pushes the shaft itself, not the ring. Okay, so if you had it in overdrive and you tried to push the car into reverse, you could do that. Oh no, you can't because you're pushing the shaft. Yeah. If the car is turning and I lock, this is the direction the car is going forward. Right now it's in third gear. If I push the locking pawl, what happens? Let's see. I see what happens. Remember that ring? That's why this doesn't happen. That ring is in let's turn it really freely now. That horn-shaped ring, it moves with the pawl, and it doesn't allow me to lock. Doesn't allow me or the solenoid to lock the control ring when the car is moving, because that friction causes that ring to it has like a blocker. It's called a blocker ring. That's what it does, and it actually shown on figure 7. So yeah, it's impossible to lock the transmission that way when the car is moving, unless that ring there is in the wrong place. That's why it's vital. It's very important, guys, that when you're reassembling the transmission, that opening of the ring, those horns, that they are around the this square piece here, this pawl. Okay, because if they aren't, let's say this drill here is the pawl has to be like that, as shown in the manual. If it's like that, then you might be able to lock the transmission while it's in motion, which would be disastrous. Now there is some movement here, so eventually I'll be able to lock it here someplace. Just try to tilt it over so that it's easier, that gravity's helping me here. When that pawl is in, it doesn't allow the shift lever to move. So it's moving in, it's moving freely now. But if that pawl is in, look, it's Not in yet. That pawl is really in there. It wasn't before. It's hard to get in there. Now it's in there. Now the shift lever won't move anymore. See? It's not in yet. So it's still. It's a little hard to get this in. But by holding still the shift pawl, it allows that force, how can I say this, centrifugal force, to push the sun gear into meshing with the pinion cage. Sorry, I'm just let's see what the manual says. If the locking plate, control plate is held stationary, what happens? I'm just having trouble engaging the pawl here. Engage it by hand. Just hoping to engage it by it's not engaged yet. Maybe it is. There we go. Okay, now it's engaged. Now, when it is engaged, fully engaged, as it is right now, there. Sorry guys, apologies, it did take a little long. It's fully engaged. The shifter here, it won't shift into direct drive. So right now, it's actually closed in overdrive. Okay? Why? Because when that locking pawl locks that control plate, it not only it doesn't allow this this shaft here, you see, it doesn't allow the shaft to move because of the shape it is inside. It's got a slot. So I push, when the solenoid pushes the pawl in, it gets in the middle of the slot on this shaft here and doesn't allow it to shift, doesn't allow it to move. You know, remember, if it moves that way to the right, is what you're seeing now. Sorry, to the yeah, if it moves to the right, no, if it moves to the left, is what, right now it's on my right, but you guys are seeing my left. So if it moves to the left, what you guys see now, remember the sun gear, so let's make it easier. If the sun gear, if this shift fork here moves the sun gear that way, to the left of what you see now, towards the end here, then it locks these pinion gears and we're in manual mode. So by not allowing this, when the solenoid, which is doing what I'm doing here now with the drill bit, locks that control plate in, it also locks this the shaft and doesn't allow you to shift to manual. So right now it's in direct overdrive mode. Remember how if you had it without this way, if you didn't have it this way, if this wasn't engaged, then it would switch from manual and auto to automatic overdrive automatically. Now it's in perpetual overdrive. You can't get it to manual, see? You have to move this to get it back into manual mode. So let's see, right now it's in third gear. If I want it to go to overdrive, if I want it to shift down to second, so now it's in second, still in overdrive, neutral. Now you can get it in first overdrive, see, first overdrive. But if I tried to get it in reverse, it would push this out. But right now it's not able to push it out because of the pawl. So you can't. It actually doesn't allow you to get it into a reverse. It'll still slightly go into reverse because there's still a lot of play in here and the shaft. But this pawl, it doesn't allow you to put it in reverse while you're in overdrive and high speed. Well, in any speed, it doesn't allow you to put reverse and overdrive. It's impossible. See? Forced it out. If we were in manual mode, what would happen is this here would be connected to this here, and this will start to overrun, and that centrifugal force would force the sun gear back into there and would go back into overdrive, which is really interesting. So I guess I sort of explained what happens. It is a little confusing. I must admit that my explanation, I should do a step-by-step explanation, right? But, well, I just want to give you guys a little idea of what it does and how it works. So once again, you do need to have that frictional drag there when you're in manual mode. It's not a lot, but it is gotta be. It has to be enough to move that ring there. I don't want to imagine what would happen if that ring were to. See, that's a little bit of a design weakness. If that ring, for whatever reason, loses its drag, loses its friction, it might allow this to lock the transmission while it's moving. That would be disastrous. I'm guessing I'm missing something here. A good way for you to see what I mean by centrifugal force on a helically cut gear is this here. Even though we're in overdrive, if I move this, you'll see that it has a tendency, let's lock it. It has a tendency to slip out, you see. If I turn it the other way, it has a tendency to slip in. Let's watch this. You see, I'm turning the transmission here manually. See how it's slipping in? If I turn it the other way, it starts to slip out, you see? You see that? Right here? So, turn it back. You see? Now I'm turning it the opposite way. It's moving itself in. So there it is. If I turn it the other way, starts to spin itself out. You see? That's because these are helically cut. I'm going to turn it the other way again. It's going to... Okay, no, that was too much. Just went completely out. Slightly in. Turn it the other way. See, it was only a little bit. It only had a little bit of contact. High speed, it's turning itself in. Back in again, see? Both hands. So now it's back in. Okay, now if I turn it the other way, if I reverse rotation, this is going to tend to move out. Watch this. You see? There it is. Separated. Turn it the other way. It's going to turn. It's going to move itself in. See? Because it works sort of like a screw. Okay? Now here, with that sun gear, it's the same thing. Now by locking it, you can cause it to turn just in one direction. If it tends to turn the other direction instead of turning the plate with it, the plate will actually act as a holding, and the sun gear will sort of screw itself into the locking plate instead of moving the locking plate with it. Okay, so locking the locking plate. And because of the helically cut, it only works in one direction. So I just try to figure out which way I'm turning it the way it's supposed to be now. So it was turning the other way. You're turning the reverse. This is in a reverse direction, which would occur. Okay, this reverse rotation, remember, it doesn't occur in reverse, like reverse gear. It occurs when this starts to overrun here. So if you start to overrun, if you're in manual mode and the car starts to turn faster than the engine, it's going to twist and it's going to push. If you're in manual mode, yeah, I understand it completely now. If you're in manual mode, okay, right now you're in manual mode, and the solenoid isn't pushed in, isn't locking in, isn't locking in the control plate. See that the control plate is moving with the pin and cage. Now, if the lock plate was locked in, this reverse rotation would probably force the sun gear back inside, and you'd be in overdrive. If the locking plate isn't locked in, then it just keeps. Yeah, that's right. It just keeps locking. It just keeps spinning the lock plate, the control plate with it, and you're still in manual mode, regardless of the speed of this. Regardless of the speed, you're still in manual mode. If it goes back, yeah, then you're in overdrive. Sorry, it turns the other way. I'm saying I said it right, but the opposite way. This is the rotation. So the way it's cut, with higher speeds have a tendency to push the locking plate that way into manual mode. So now if you have reverse rotation, that would cause it to normally go back into overdrive. But if it's locked, sort of like that. I'm just not sure how to explain it, but that's how it works. The rotation of the car is this way. Let me see what the manual says, then it's easier.